Well, hi again. So some familiar faces and some new faces. So this is the second session on the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. So my name is Kim St. Martin. I am the director for Michigan's Multi-Tiered System of Support, MTSS Technical Assistance Center. Prior to that, my very first teaching job was in the City School District of Philadelphia. So I taught at Potter Thomas Elementary. And then moved to Michigan with my now husband, where he was getting his PhD in counseling psych. He's born and raised Michigan. We're huge U of M fans. Mm-hmm. I know, like you guys, most of you must be Nittany Lions, right? Penn State?
Yes.
Yes, yep, that's right.
Yes, no, I saw you.
I'm with you.
You're U of M?
My mom's from Michigan.
I mean, we do, there's a little bit of controversy right now with the U of M, team. We're being accused of sign stealing. So we'll see what happens with that, but go blue. So I also, I taught in Philadelphia. I've been a former elementary principal. I'm an upstate New Yorker. We say elementary. And it doesn't happen in a lot of spaces. It sounds like except for upstate New York. And so I had shared with the last group that I was with some New Yorkers from the New York State Department of Ed a few weeks ago at a U.S. Department of Ed conference. And it was so nice to be with people that talk like me. I mean, they said elementary, we said it was foggy, we wear sneakers. I had all the good words that I could say. So, but I am a former elementary principal, and I've been working with response intervention MTSS really since 2003, but I've been formally working at the Technical Assistance Center since 2007. Literacy is one of my areas of expertise, and so I was on the IES practice guide panel for providing reading interventions for students in grades 4 through 9. The adolescent space is I just love. I absolutely love middle and high school students and working with, secondary folks and how to accelerate reading outcomes. So I'm here to also talk about today the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. And the first session was more an overview of what the R-TFI is. This one is how do you use the data to guide implementation planning? So just a real quick assessment from the crowd. How many of you are familiar with or have used the R-TFI? Okay, good. And it's okay if you haven't. So I wasn't sure how many people I would get that had prior knowledge. And so the way in which I have structured this, which before I go to that, if you don't have access right now, it should be uploaded to the Google site. This is a Kim St. Martin issue. I did not get it in the deadline for Patton. So if it's not there, it's because of Kim St. Martin. Has nothing to do with Patton. But I did want to give you a QR code. This links you right to an open access Google folder that actually has the last session materials in it and these materials. So, and if you were to forward the link to people, just share it. It's open access, so anyone would be able to access it. So I'll give you guys a second to take a picture of it. Did you get it? Do you want to go closer?
That's all right.
It's all right.
I got it.
Okay, you got it. Okay. So because I wasn't sure of people's familiarity with the R-TFI, I wanted to start this session talking about what really is required to be able to effectively implement things. And so some of you may be familiar with implementation science, implementation research. I'm going to just give a light touch on the necessary ingredients. That's the term I'm going to use. What are the necessary ingredients needed to be able to support the implementation of, in this case, the data, systems, and practices to address the reading components of an MTSS framework. And then I'm going to go a bit deeper and talk about if you administer the R-TFI, I'm going to really advocate that people need professional learning in the things that are in the R-TFI. At the same time, though, some of the key implementation roles that we're going to talk about are the distinction between training or professional learning from coaching from consultation. I'm going to make a distinction between those three. And then we're going to dig into the R-TFI data. I've created some support tools that are in that Google folder that you guys just snapped the QR code for. These are coaching concepts and strategies. So if you are coaching a school to take their R-TFI data and move forward with planning, I'm going to go over what those coaching concepts are because they're prioritized, they're aligned with the items, and I think it would be a helpful tool for either your systems level coaches or your instructional coaches working with schools. So we're going to start with effective implementation, and again, framed around the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. If you haven't seen the R-TFI, I do have a hard copy of the elementary and the secondary version. Happy to pass it around. If you wanted to get it on the My MTSS, MI for Michigan, MTSS Technical Assistance Center, here's our website, and you can download it. And some people at times want to order the printed version. Our version of IUs, they're ISDs, Intermediate School District, KRESA, Kalamazoo Regional Education Service Agency, they do all the printing for our Technical Assistance Center, and they do have the files, so if anyone wanted to order printed copies, they are available through them. It's a totally separate transaction through KRESA, but I just wanted to give a nod for it. You don't need to. You can access it via PDF, and it's just fine. Okay, so effective implementation. How many of you are familiar with implementation research, implementation science? Okay, so I'm going to fully out myself as an implementation science geek. I actually own 3 different t-shirts that have, you're going to see a formula up here. I have a t-shirt that has that on it. There's something called implementation drivers. I have that on the back. There's the implementation stages planning tool. I have that on the front with the stages of implementation on the back. I love implementation science. I really believe that thinking about how to systematically support people in the successful use, scale up, and sustainability of evidence-based practices is really, really important. So when we think about effective implementation, we have this research to implementation gap. On the one hand, we have evidence-based practices, right? We've got things that fall under the umbrella of like the science of reading. We have very specific things that are in the Institute for Education Science practice guides. And the goal is that we want to enhance teaching and accelerate learner outcomes. And so oftentimes though, people assume that if we choose research and effective practices, that by definition, that means it's going to translate into improving teaching and accelerating outcomes. But when we think about in the context of the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory, what are we talking about needs to be implemented? So like on this left-hand side, what are these research and evidence-based practices that are within the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory? Well, we have to think about assessments. The types of screening assessments that we're using, the progress monitoring assessments. Are those high quality assessments? Is there evidence behind them? We also have to think about diagnostic assessments if students aren't responding to the intervention instruction. And then we have all those evidence-based practices and materials that we're using to support kids in learning to read, whether it's in the Tier 1 classroom space, or if I'm an intervention provider, what do I have in my hand to be able to deliver intervention instruction, for example, with students who have multisyllabic decoding needs, okay? So we have evidence-based instructional practices and materials that we have to implement, and we have to think about systems and processes. We have to think about ways in which we can support the teachers and the students who are in our school settings to be able to use these things well and to benefit from these evidence-based practices. One of my favorite quotes that relates to systems is from Mike Schmoker from the book Results Now. He says, "You place a good person in a bad system, the system wins every time." And I really believe in that. I mean, I've seen wonderful teachers who have left the profession after a few years because they were not supported. They didn't feel like they had the materials and the implementation supports needed to feel successful. So a part of what needs to be implemented, in addition to high quality assessments, high quality instructional practices and materials, are these systems and processes so that we can do these things well and that all kids can benefit from them. So this is what needs to be implemented. This is what would be on that left-hand side of the graphic. Now I want to just be clear, because some people say, well, we're implementing MTSS. I want to just I want to say something about MTSS. This is like my pet peeve, so I have to own it's my pet peeve. MTSS is just a framework. It is only as good as the evidence-based practices, assessments, curriculum materials that are within that framework. So nothing annoys me more when people write generic goals around MTSS, but they're using things that have no evidence that they're effective. So it's like, don't say you're implementing MTSS if you're using crap. Because the truth is that all that is, if you have tried to create a system around garbage, all you have is well-organized garbage. That's it. And that's not going to improve outcomes. So I want to say that, the things we're implementing in the R-TFI, I did not overtly say MTSS because MTSS is a framework. It's all of the things that are on this slide that fall within that framework to be able to support students. So I want you to think first, before we go back to this research to practice gap, I want you to think of a time when your school, it doesn't have to be current, it can be previous years, was implementing something new. What contributed to the successes or the lack thereof? So go ahead and just talk about some of those things, and then we're going to share out in just a minute. Let's share out a couple of things that people thought of. Okay, no wait, are you going to do our little, microphone? It's on.
No.
Talking it. No, it's not on.
Slide the switch up.
Well, that's all right. I can.
Slide the switch up on the microphone.
Well, I'm going to use my microphone. Okay, who would like to share what went well with implementation or what didn't go well?
So I've had experience with good and bad in this, but when implementing something, we focus on that leadership first, having that strong and long-term vision years ahead, but also the knowledge building within the people who are steering the ship. We found districts that don't have that, it just all falls apart. And that's really foundational.
Yeah, the leadership support, absolutely. Who else wants to share something?
Mine was clarity of expectations for all involved instead of, oh, and wait, there's more. Oh, and there's just a little bit more. So if we're clear at the beginning, we seem to be doing better.
Yep. Clear is kind. I mean, I love that. I think it's a Brene Brown.
Yeah.
Clear is kind, right? I love that. Who else wants to share? Anything else?
So we were just talking about the level of support. It can't be one-offs. It has to be continual progress, monitoring, continual learning, and shoring up your systems. Otherwise, it's going to fail.
Yeah, it's not like a one and done, right? It's not, it's ongoing support. Excellent. Any others? Any others? Okay. So implementation does matter. And for the research geeks out there, I can add this meta-analysis to the Google folder. But there is a Dunst and Trivet meta-analysis that's talking about how to actually get things implemented. And the big reveal, which shouldn't shock people, is that the level of implementation, so the quality of implementation, impacts the outcomes that you're going to get. But there were other key findings in this that are relevant, especially to the work that we're doing within MTSS. One of the first things that they found was shared distributed leadership is a key lever to being able to successfully implement things. So anyone who's got an ed leadership degree, I have ed leadership degrees, you've had to read a Michael Fullan book. Or, Senge, if I really want to date myself, a Peter Senge book, or Stephen Covey book. But Michael Fullan has this great quote where he says, you have to work with administrators and make sure that they don't fall into the heroic leadership trap. And that's huge, because what that's saying is that for administrators, they believe the weight of the world is on their shoulders for the success or lack thereof for being able to implement the evidence-based practices, initiatives, and that just couldn't be farther from the truth. Like, no one person could do it alone. So what the Implementation Matters meta-analysis found was that leaders who distribute leadership were actually more effective at getting things implemented so that you were benefiting from the intended results. And we're going to see in a little bit later in our time together how the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory and implementation research talks about the importance of having teams who are supporting implementation. That is a key way by which the administrator can and should distribute his or her leadership, so there's shared responsibility. But the other things that they found with Implementation Matters was that the context in which things are implemented is important. And that is kind of a newer emerging finding in the implementation community. Like a lot of people assume if it works in a research setting, surely it must work when we put this in a school. And that just isn't always the case. And so there's more attention now to thinking about how to adapt evidence-based practices given the context and the setting in which they're being implemented. So think about, I'm from Michigan, I talked about the Upper Peninsula. How the reading components of an MTSS framework look in a K-12 building where the superintendent's also the principal and also driving the bus, that looks different than in the City School District of Philadelphia. Now, I just gave two extremes, but how things get implemented and how we leverage and work with and through people does make a difference. And so more attention from the implementation community has to be on the context, the setting in which, what needs to happen to make things more effective to fit the context of schools and districts. The final thing that I'll mention is that this notion of fidelity was also addressed in this meta-analysis. And it's very important that we're talking about this because the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory is a fidelity assessment. What the meta-analysis indicated was 100% perfection is not possible. So people who say all components must be in place, that is an unrealistic expectation. Now, if you think of PBIS, my PBIS peeps, you all get this because the school-wide PBIS, Tiered Fidelity Inventory, says that if you achieve a score of 70% or higher, then that has been researched and is predictive of a reduction of behavior incidences, for example. So there's a threshold for fidelity. 100% implementation was not needed. There's a level of implementation that's needed, and the Implementation Matters meta-analysis underscored that. For the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory, we're shooting for 80% or higher. So again, not 100, we're shooting for a threshold that's needed in order to see the intended outcomes. So some of the common approaches to bridging the research to practice gap is we're going to diffuse and disseminate information. We're going to provide a lot of training. We're going to legislate it. We're going to have laws and mandates. We're going to provide funding or other incentives to help schools want to implement. And there are instances where people go through organizational change. Think of like third grade reading laws, dyslexia laws. I've been working with my colleagues in the state of Ohio. They have a brand new dyslexia law. Just having a law does not mean that it's going to result in its intended outcome. So these common approaches, what the research has indicated, they do not lead to increased use of the evidence-based practices and materials. And so your return on investment is only about 5 to 15%. So all of that is only going to give you about a 5 to 15% return on investment. So the big idea is, how do we get a better return on investment? How do we, in implementing a multi-tiered system of support, apply to social emotional behavior, literacy, how do we maximize what we're trying to do to get a good return on the investment for bridging the evidence to the research gap? So we have another formula. Now, I did fully disclose in the last session, I am not a math person. If you were to ask my high school math teacher, Mr. Tomasetti would affirm this, but we have a multiplicative explanation for how we bridge the research to practice gap. So we've got effective practices on the left-hand side. So these are our evidence-based practices and assessments. Those are the things that are in the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory. How do we make it so those things translate into not just accelerated learning, but socially significant outcomes? We don't want just a little bit of success. We want it to be pretty robust, pretty significant, to be able to help all of our students be able to read. So we have to fill in what's missing in this gap. And so this is what's referred to as the formula for success. This is the implementation formula. And if in any multiplication fact, if you have 0, what's your answer going to be? 0. So all 3 of these things are needed. So you have to have effective practices. So I was talking with one of our IU or colleagues in the back as a speech and language path. He said, I've worked in schools that didn't really have good things in their MTSS framework. So if we don't have those effective evidence-based practices, if that's not present, no matter if you're doing these other things, you're not going to get socially significant outcomes. But now we've got to make sure that the way in which we're implementing is effective, and we have to think about the context in which these things are being implemented. We want to make sure what we're doing enables or helps implementation hold in order to get to these outcomes. So what does that look like in the context of districts or schools who are really trying to say, let's get really good at implementing these things? Well, we want clarity in what's being implemented. So someone in the back was saying, like we were talking about clear as kind, right? So clarity, what's being implemented? What's the evidence for it? With whom is it used for? How well operationalized is it? Is it realistic, practical, and doable? Is it, and many things, I'm just gonna be honest, if you're implementing a new reading curriculum resource, those are not necessarily realistic, practical, and doable. I mean, my goodness, sometimes teachers could teach nothing but that all day, every day. So one of the things that I advocate to publishers of materials is to outline the need to do's, like the non-negotiable, these are the core components, and then let people know how to implement them. How would they know if they're on track, off track, kind of middle of the road? Make it operationalized so people can understand if they're on a right path. And then help think about these practices, how they can be adapted given the context. For effective implementation, we've got to think about how implementation progresses over time. So one of our colleagues in the back said, there were things that never had the social validity. They didn't have the buy-in. Well, so how does implementation progress over time? There are things like stages in which we implement, and we would want to do our due diligence to exploring and developing consensus and buy-in so that there is social validity to the things that people are being asked to use. They've had a say, they've had a voice. It's not just a decision was made, training is next week, materials will be delivered to your room, ready, go, okay? So we have to think about how implementation progresses over time. How do we build an infrastructure to sustain what's being implemented? And how do we use data to continuously communicate about and improve our work? And then how do we transition support? So in our state, we have a lot of intermediate school districts who are providing coaching supports, training supports in schools, kind of like your IUs and Patton, like how you guys do. But the goal, you can't live in these schools forever. So we've got to be thinking about building internal capacity so that when the supports fade, it's not going to be like a house of cards. It's not going to fall apart. And so We think about transitioning supports and building internal capacity in part by thinking of coaching, internal coaches that are employed in the district or school level. And then last but not least, enabling context. How are we involving our partners in these conversations about what's being implemented? And how are we using data to inform our assets, our successes, and our opportunities for continuous improvement? So this is kind of the formula for success from an implementation science lens. So when we think about effective implementation within the R-TFI, so that effective implementation rectangle in that formula for success, these are the things that we call out in the R-TFI. Professional learning is needed for teachers in social emotional behavior supports and in those practices that fall under the umbrella of the science of reading. Coaching support is needed, instructional classroom coaching, and we call it systems coaching, or the coaching of teams, like the school leadership team, the coaching of a multidisciplinary team. We have assessments and data coordination. We talk about selecting the right assessments and picking people to coordinate to make sure data is being collected, analyzed, and used on a regular basis. And then the teams that are up here, and I should have added one for my secondary colleagues, but at the elementary level, we talk about school leadership team, grade level teams, and a multidisciplinary team. I would add one more team if I was talking about secondary, it'd be department teams. The role of the math, ELA, science, and social studies department has a big role in the tier 1 components of an MTSS framework as they're infusing strategies to help kids understand what they're reading and learning across their core subject areas. So department teams would be another teaming structure. These are the teams that help our leaders share and distribute the leadership to support implementation. So here's an example scope and sequence that could be used if you said, Kim, I need to get this done in like 2 to 3 years. I'm going to give you an example scope and sequence to do this in 2 to 3 years. Okay, so we do keep all of our materials on the MyMTSS website. However, at the end of our time together, you all don't live in Michigan, you live in Pennsylvania, and you have an amazing TA center here. And so at the end of our time together, we're going to actually pull open Patton's materials so you can make sure that you're able to get the support that you need from people in state. Okay, so this is an at a glance. I give an elementary scope and sequence, year 1, year 2, and I give a secondary scope and sequence. Now, some of you already are like, whoa, she's talking about district. Look at that box right up there. District supports. Yes, I am, because in our state, we really try to work with district leaders and district teams to create what we refer to as an implementation infrastructure so that everything that's put in the hands of teachers, actually they can be used well, sustained over time, and they get the supports that they need. So full disclosure, when we used to do this type of MTSS work, school by school by school, we saw good outcomes, didn't sustain because we went school by school by school. If you want to get to the path of sustainability, then we've got to think about the district processes and procedures. Those are things like a formal process to review, select, and deselect initiatives, evidence-based practices, assessments. Another example that's a part of a district system is a barrier removal process. How do challenges that are experienced across schools, how do they get lifted to the right decision makers at the district and then acted upon so that we're not doing the water cooler kind of conversations? Like, oh, I happened to be at central office. I happened to see so-and-so, and I told them what was happening, and that's why they happened to intervene. That is just creating, our PBIS colleague, Rob Horner, would say that's a ghost system. It's something that happens just because of who you know, but it isn't a formalized process. You want to move ghost systems into host systems, which means like a way of work, an operating way of work within the district. So we start with that district work up here. If you had preschool settings, we are very much supporting the pyramid model and the pyramid model practices, which you guys are in Pennsylvania as well. So we would start some of that work right away in the summer, fall. And then we start right away with creating safe, predictable, and engaging classroom environments. We start right away with classroom social emotional behavior supports with teachers, where they are learning how to prevent, teach, and respond to some of the difficulties that they're experiencing within their settings. And we also know that they need professional learning in the types of things that would fall in the category of scientifically based reading research or the science of reading. In our state, that happens to be the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. I am not, I don't want anyone to think that that's the only source of professional learning for the science of reading. There's other things, but in our state, there's state aid that goes towards that. So it's free for teachers and leaders who want to take it. So that's why it's on my slide. And we right away in the first year start talking about how to create a good, robust intervention system. So we start talking about how to intensify intervention instruction in the first year. So this would mean, from an R-TFI perspective, we have a lot of the stuff in letters, in the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. Those would be those classroom level items that talk about the foundational reading skills, the comprehension processes, the reading items of the R-TFI. The intensifying, this bottom one, would be the advanced tiers. And this classroom teachers, creating safe, predictable, engaging environments, that would be the item in the R-TFI that is just focused on social emotional behavior supports in the classroom. So you can start to see already where we're checking the boxes. Now, full disclosure, my first pet peeve is people just talking generically about MTSS. But my second pet peeve is actually people delaying a good conversation about how to teach people how to do intervention. I am guilty of this. So year one, we're going to talk about tier one. Year two, we're going to talk about tier two. Year three, we're going to talk about tier three. If you've got a first grader 3 years later, that first grader is now going into, second, third, fourth grade, and we know that the older kids get, the probability of accelerating their outcomes and closing that opportunity gap is much less than if we had tried to do that right at the start of first grade. And so within the state of Michigan, and our national colleagues at the National Center for Intensive Intervention, we talk about MTSS in a bi-directional, two-way sort of a way. So I did not put the triangle up here. I know I probably created some kind of MTSS crime. I did not put up the proverbial geometric shape, but if I were to put up the triangle, you'd see an arrow going up and an arrow going down. And this represents this. The arrow going down is we're going to start at the tip of the triangle, what would be intensive intervention supports. We're going to work with the right teaming structure, the multidisciplinary team, to teach them what high quality intervention means, how do we intensify intervention supports, and we're going to talk at the tier one space as well with scientifically based reading research, with safe, predictable, engaging classroom environments. So this is in this year one scope and sequence, you can see this bi-directional two-way model taking shape, going up the triangle and down the triangle at the same time. In year two, this is what year two looks like at the elementary level. So district is just engaging in continuous improvement. They've installed or kind of put in place their district operating procedures. Now they're using data to test it out. How's it working? Early childhood, they're in continuous improvement as well. The initial learning's happening. They're using their data to continuously improve. Now at the school level, we now approach PBIS in non-classroom settings. This is where the school-wide PBIS, tiered fidelity inventory, or whatever your PBIS assessment is, that's where it would come into play. we now are teaching how to implement PBIS in the non-classroom common areas like hallways, playground, bathrooms. And we're working with grade level teams to get really good now what they learned in letters and what they're using to teach class-wide reading curriculum or their reading curriculum resources. How do we work with them to look at their data and know what to prioritize and how to structure their reading instruction in such a way that it's going to adequately meet the needs of the students that are in their classrooms. The multidisciplinary team, they've built their intervention system and now they're trying it out and they're expanding it. We have them start with first and second grade, and then we have them expand their learning and generalize it to other grade levels. Letters is still going on because it's a 2-year professional learning series. Year 1 is volume 1, year 2 is volume 2. But this is another example of how we're going up the triangle and down the triangle at the same time. So, and then is there anything else they need professional learning in? Well, they need to know how to administer and score their screening assessments, their progress monitoring assessments. They need to know how to use the data to inform instruction. And the interventionist, they need to learn how to administer, score progress monitoring assessments in program progress monitoring assessments and what I would refer to as a general outcome progress monitoring assessment, like an Acadience or a Dibble's 8th edition, phoneme segmentation, nonsense word fluency, or reading fluency assessment. So there is other learning, but this is a way in which it could be structured. Before I give you guys some time to process, I want to just share the impact of a particular district that got really focused on high quality tier 1 reading instruction, giving teachers the learning that they needed in the science of reading, really good materials. So this is real kindergarten data. This is last year's data, so it gives you each of these boxes. You have, so beginning of the year, middle of year, end of the year. This is 3 years worth of data. We started kind of post-pandemic. So 2019-20 would have been pandemic. This would have been the year that they just came back from the pandemic. But notice the black line in the box is where the 50th percentile is. So kind of the middle of the pack of these kindergartners. And notice how they're entering kindergarten. I mean, between 21, 22, 22, 23, not that different, right? I mean, this is kind of consistent, coming in with the same type of skills. And then here is where they are at the middle of the year, each of the 3 years, and the end of the year. We ideally want this whole box and the very fine whisker that you can't see. We ideally would want all that above the green, okay? But this is what happened. I'm going to drop a phase line to show you the changes that this particular district made. So right in the 2021-2022 school year, the teachers were completing letters. So they had dabbled in it. The curriculum director said, nope, we want to make sure everyone has the learning that they have. The curriculum director led them, the elementary school, through a high quality tier 1 curriculum resource review. The district had created their formal review selection deselection process at that district level, and they were trying it out now for tier 1 curriculum resource adoption, okay? So that happened in year, where that blue box is. Now, the beginning of last school year, the teachers now implemented the tier 1 curriculum resource. So what this shows you, if you look at the impact of just giving teachers the learning that they needed and what scientifically based reading research is, look at a difference between the green box and this blue box. They made improvements, would you agree? I mean, that's a big difference. Like look at the 50th percentile. But look at the difference this last school year. And that's the power of giving teachers the knowledge in what to teach, what constitutes scientifically based reading research, and putting in their hands materials that are going to allow them to focus on what they were hired to do, which is teach not develop curriculum, not right. And this is going, I mean, it really is the perfect combination. So, so I just wanted to share this with you. And from my secondary folks who are here, I have 2 slides where there's your version as well. Same district processes that was in the elementary one. Same classroom social emotional behavior supports. Same intensifying stuff with the multidisciplinary team. But now we're not doing letters. Letters isn't for secondary, so that's gone. And for core subject area teachers, we're teaching them strategies of things they can do before kids start reading, while they're reading, and after they've read, to ensure that they are understanding what it is that they are learning and what they're reading in these classes. Okay, that's year 1. In year 2, it's very similar. Non-classroom PBIS is happening. Core subject area teachers are still learning more strategies. Now we have grade level teams at the secondary level meeting because they're looking at their own behavioral data across their grade level. Are there hot spots in their particular grade that need to be addressed? And they're also talking about how to incorporate intervention strategies into their core subjects. So they're meeting as a grade level to talk about the kids who are getting intervention, and they're learning about what those strategies are. And as a grade level, they're saying, oh, I could prompt these kids to use this strategy when they're in my class. And then the multidisciplinary team, they are applying their intervention system that they did the previous year. So I'd like you to take just a couple of minutes and talk about how this type of learning could work in the context of your district. And then we're going to come back together and I'm going to show you a couple of coaching resources. I'll go back. How many secondary people do I have? A couple of you? Middle school? Okay. Well, I'll do half and half. I'll put it on elementary and then I'll put it on middle school. All right. So now I want to distinguish between training and coaching, and I'm going to add in consultation, okay? Because when we think about implementation supports, I said to the group that I was with last time, I'm like, please do not use the R-TFI if you're not going to give teachers in the schools access to the professional learning. Like, don't just administer it, because I'm going to be honest, you're going to have, especially at the secondary level, you're going to have really, really, really low data. And all it's going to do is frustrate people. And if there's no professional learning, if people don't see like the light at the end of the tunnel, I mean, even when I administer for baseline, I say, this is baseline. We're going to go up from here. And we have professional learning that directly aligns with this and coaching supports. So the next time we administer the R-TFI, it's not going to look this way. It's going to look better. And so so I'm a big proponent of using, like, aligning professional learning with what we're asking people to do and providing support beyond training. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the Joyce and Showers research on the impact of training. And we want professional learning. We want professional learning to include theory and discussion. And what Joyce and Showers looked at is they looked at the cumulative effect. So theory and discussion plus demonstrations where the presenter is demonstrating, modeling what the training participants would be expected to do, plus practice, participants are practicing, and the facilitator of the training is giving feedback. So if you've got all of these things, theory and discussion, plus demonstration and training, plus practice and feedback and training, you're going to increase participant knowledge. 60% of your participants are going to have increased knowledge, meaning your training taught them what you wanted them to learn. And 60% of them are going to be able to demonstrate the skill, at least in the training space, where you taught them these things. But here's where it gets a little bit sad. Only 5% are going to leave the training space and actually implement in the context of their setting. So this is where the plus coaching comes into play. So if we have all of these things that are in training, that are the font is black, plus we add coaching in the setting, and Joyce and Showers did practice level instructional, so classroom coaching. You increase people's knowledge. 95% have knowledge, 95% can demonstrate the skill, and great news, 95% can use what they were taught to do in the context of the classroom setting, okay? So we want 95%. Ideally, that's what we want, okay? We want, I mean, great if your training's wonderful, but if it's only resulting in 5% of the people doing something differently, that's not good enough. So this is where we have to distinguish between training and coaching. And I say this because depending upon the space and place in which you're situated, sometimes I find people are using the definition of coaching where it's kind of starting to confuse it with training, with professional learning. Because I actually have seen definitions where the definition of coaching is to teach or provide professional learning. It's like, well, that's a different function. It is a professional learning facilitator function. And I could be a great trainer, but I could be a really bad coach. I mean, and vice versa. I could be a wonderful coach, but you put me up to train people in something, may not be able to do it. So professional learning is the presentation of new material in order to develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities, whereas coaching is now the on-site support needed to help people use what they were taught and now build their fluency so they can apply it in the actual setting. So one person could do both, but the skills needed for both are not a one-to-one. They do vary. So here are some coaching assumptions. Most states, like in the state of Michigan, Ohio, and I don't know about Pennsylvania, we have a lot of state-supported coaching efforts that are happening. So coaching is being encouraged across states. The research does support the value of coaching for improving people's initial adoption. So like, I'm a teacher, we've just selected CKLA, and now I need coaching to improve my ability to use what just got adopted, that's been put into my hands. And there are two coaching types. There's instructional classroom coaching, which was what the Joyce and Showers research was on. And there's also systems level coaching. This would be the coaching of the teams who are learning to function as a team, to be able to keep a pulse on the work, to be able to help the leader in distributing the responsibilities. But there's a lot of challenges that still remain in how to select these people to coach, how to teach people to coach, how to organize the coaching supports so that it happens in an equitable, efficient, effective way, and that it's realistic, practical, and doable. Okay? So there is a lot of empirical support for coaching. However, the reality is that when we look at some of those studies that have been done on coaching models, package models have been studied, but there hasn't been enough robust research on its impact on improving learner outcomes. So more research is actually needed in regards to coaching. So the most recent meta-analysis on coaching by Kraft, Hogan, and Blazer looked at the effect size. It was a meta-analysis. It looked at coaching literature, research studies that have been done, and it looked at how effective was coaching in changing teacher practices and how effective was coaching in changing learner outcomes. Big difference. Changing teacher practices, high effect size, 0.71. Anything that's like 0.4, 0.5 or higher is good. This is 0.71. But changes in student performance, like learner outcomes, much less, 0.11. Now, I have a couple of theories. They're only theories. I could be totally wrong. But for my reading folks out there, if you've watched Sold a Story or listened to Sold a Story by Emily Hanford, there's a lot of people that claim there's curriculum materials that are aligned with the science of reading, and they're not. They actually are full of scientifically invalid practices. So if I'm giving my teachers training in those things, and I'm giving them coaching in those things, I wouldn't be surprised to see a change in their ability to do what I'm coaching them, and I would not be surprised that it's not moving the needle on student outcomes. because it's not the right stuff. So this doesn't surprise me, but more is needed to really focus on this. Yeah.
Does she tell you I haven't listened to the podcast. Does she tell you which programs those are?
Well, she does. Yeah. So she names Heinemann as the publisher, Lucy Calkins. Yeah. Yep. Now, if we were in the state of Ohio, I think we just need to take a moment of silence for our Ohio colleagues, because they are where Ohio State is, which is where Irene Fountas and Gay Supinel are, and Irene Fountas just gave millions of dollars for an endowment to keep reading recovery alive and well. The governor just enacted legislation banning the 3 queuing system, which is what reading recovery and Fountas and Pinnell and that stuff promotes. And Ohio State just filed a lawsuit against the governor's office, and because they don't believe that it is his place to ban the 3 queuing system, because they want reading recovery and Fountas and Pinnell to get on the approved state instructional intervention materials list, which is a part of the legislation. So yeah, it's been named for sure. So some of the recommended coaching strategies so this is what we would want coaches to do. We want them to build the fluency of the people that they're coaching. We want fluency building strategies. We don't want to enable people, okay? So I've seen coaches that say, let me model. That would be the equivalent. Like, even if you look at the research on learning, if we think about, I'm going to provide explicit teaching in order to help kids learn. If the worst thing I can do is just keep modeling, the power is in the guided practice. Still model. It's like, I do something, we do something, you do something. Oops, that was not done well. Let me go back to, I'm gonna help affirm what you did right. I'm gonna correct what wasn't. And now we do something. Let me see how you do it again. I've seen coaches with teachers, they say, well, let me keep showing you. All that does is builds dependency, not capacity. So coaching needs to could include reteaching. Like, if they didn't understand it in the initial professional learning, it could include reteaching, but that is the coach who's temporarily taking his or her hat off and putting a training hat on. Because I'm now stepping out of my coach role, and I'm going to have to reteach you because you didn't learn it the first time, which is fine, but let's just call it what it is. I'm in a trainer mode. I also, as a coach, we want coaches to co-facilitate or co-teach. That's a fluency building strategy. We want some structured practice opportunities. That's a coaching strategy. We want the coach to also help the educators adapt these instructional practices and materials to their particular settings. That's a coaching strategy. And we want them to be providing feedback, affirmative feedback, informative and corrective feedback. And feedback cuts through all of these things. I mean, if I'm co-facilitating, I'm going to be observing and I'm going to be thinking, ooh, what are they doing really well? What are some opportunities for me to help tweak what they're doing so we can improve their use of these things? So this is where we get into training versus coaching versus consultation. And I just think we have to be careful of these things. I'm not going to go over them, but I've given some examples of how supports could be classified as training versus how supports could be classified as coaching. And I do want to take a moment on consultation. So I have people that say, well, I'm the coach, but they're the coach from afar, where if I were coaching you and then I did not observe anything that you did, but you picked up the phone and said, I taught a lesson and this is what I did and this is how I think it went. Tell me what I can do. Coach me. Well, that would be consultation because I had no direct observation of what she actually did, how it was received. I am only taking through through listening, like good secondhand, listening skills. I'm trying to get a verbal replay in my mind of what's happening, and it assumes that what she's saying is correct, which may or may not be the case. So be very careful with consultative coaching, because all it is coaching from afar, and it really does rely on direct observation and some of those strategies that were on the previous slide. Okay, so the final thing that I want to show you, and I'm going to shift to my, if I shift to my Word document, does that turn off the closed captioning? Okay, because you just won't, you're not going to see it very well. Like, these are too tiny for you to see. Okay, so I am going to shift to these Word documents that you have in that Google folder. You have 3 Word documents. You have the elementary Tier 1 coaching concepts that are aligned to the items of the R-TFI. You have the Tier 1 version for secondary. And you have there's elementary and secondary advanced tiers is the same. So you don't need a separate one for elementary and one for secondary. It's the same. Okay, so now I'm going to show these because I want to make sure that we can see them, okay? Okay, so if I go to these coaching concepts, all right, so this is how they are organized. So it's very important when you open this up to look at the notes. So we have coaching concepts. Some are shaded in gray, some are left white. If they are shaded in gray, they would be for people who are providing systems level coaching. There's an item in the R-TFI that specifically speaks to systems level coaching. That's the coaching of teaming structures. It's people that could help with scheduling. It doesn't require the content expertise, in this case, of literacy to do what's being asked to be done. You can see that the coaching items themselves in the R-TFI 1.2, 1.17, this is for the elementary version, they're not listed here because from a district level, if you don't have an instructional coach, you don't have a systems coach, you wouldn't be jumping to this sheet. You'd be action planning around how to identify someone to be a systems and an instructional coach. These coaching concepts are organized by the stage of implementation. Fancy term for there are things we do to get people ready, to then get people started, to get people better at implementing. So if I'm going to get people ready to implement the reading components of an MTSS framework, I want to talk to the principal and the staff about how does this fit given your district priorities. Let's talk about how ready you are in your consensus and understanding of the science of reading in MTSS. And then I'm going to, this is a systems level coach responsibility, I'm gonna work with the principal to recruit and select people to be on the school leadership team. This is where the first R-TFI item is listed right there, okay? If we're going to get started at coaching, these are all in order. So what I just said, you would go in order. You would not start with the school leadership team and then talk to people about how this fits and then develop readiness. You would start at the top and work your way down. Okay, now we're done with getting ready. Yes, we're ready. Okay, so as a coach, I'm going to get them started at addressing the reading components of an MTSS framework. So now I want the school leadership team to engage in some planning. That's these items of the R-TFI. We're going to talk about school-wide communication protocols with the grade levels, the PBIS team, the other school teams that exist. We're going to give, the school leadership team is going to make sure teachers have access to high-quality professional learning. We're going to start tackling the assessment system because you need good data. And then based on the assessments that we've chosen, the systems coach, because it's shaded in gray, needs to help the school pick people who are going to be the coordinators of the data, like the Acadian mentors, for example, like the people who can teach others how to administer, score, and analyze data. These 3 are not shaded. So it's not systems coaching, they're instructional coaches. The instructional coaches are going to help the teachers implement the literacy practices and the materials. Here's all those items. And they're going to talk about how to do high quality instruction in effective classroom environments. This is where my behavior folks will come into play too. Here are the items. And then we're going to talk about grade level planning, teaming planning for high quality tier 1. These are the getting started. The final ones for getting better at implementing the reading components of an MTSS framework is now using the data for continuous improvement. And then the coaching delivery methods or the strategies would be these things that we just went over in a previous slide. These are the range of coaching strategies that the coaches, the systems or the instructional coaches can use to move the needle. So from an R-TFI perspective, you could use your items report and you could look at how items were scored and you would prioritize the items that are here. So if you're going up to, so like if my school had a 0 or a 1 on the school leadership team, like forming a school leadership team, that's the first place I would start. But I would know based on the individual item that got scored for the R-TFI. So this is a way to sequence what coaches would be focusing on based on how their particular school did. Yeah.
I haven't looked at this before, but my question is, for that 1.1, is there more than one question that goes with that? It's one question.
One question. Yep. And what they would do would be connected to what's in the 2-point column of the R-TFI. And so, but this is where some professional learning is needed. So for example, we have recruitment and selection guidance to help principals form a school leadership team. Now my secondary folks need that a lot because they seem to have covert teams. They have department chairs who by default, because they get a Schedule B pay, are on this leadership team. But then my principals pull me aside and say, that's not really my team. I have this whole separate team. And then so I need to help them pick the right team that can really move the needle. What do you guys think? You probably think like you just drank from a fire hose. Okay. So the last thing I just want to say is for Patton, if you want support, we just wanted to give a nod.
If you are interested in receiving any type of that consultation or coaching support, that Kim did such a wonderful job of explaining, that was wonderful. We provide that. So if you go to our Patton homepage, there's a video that talks about all of the various types of support that are listed here. So you can either meet with your team, your administration, your teachers, and think about which one of these is most appropriate for you. They're pretty customized. You put in an application, and then it is sent to whatever area you're from. So we have East, Central, and West, and we can come out and we can do things like systems coaching, looking at your district-wide systems, building-wide systems. We can get into the classroom, look at modeling some instruction, coaching teachers through, paraprofessionals, all of those different things. It really is customized. So please check out the website. We're happy to always come out. So thank you. And thank you, Kim. You did such an amazing job. Thank you. This was wonderful.